A couple of things before we get started. Hey, Bill, how are you, sir? Good to see you. A couple of things before we get started. Sherry asked me, she mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we were meeting. She asked me to highlight an upcoming class with the Great Lakes School of Biblical Studies that happens on Tuesdays, starts in January. They're going to be studying the books of Revelation and Psalms. So she thought it was a really good book. If you have some time, or it'd be a really good study. If you have some time on Tuesdays, you should consider joining. I think we have pamphlets somewhere out. They're out in the front. So thanks for bringing that to everyone's attention. Really appreciate it. No, I don't. Pardon? Yeah, just get a book, right? Right. Yes, you can go to the class without buying the book. There is a small cost if you want to buy the book, right? Okay. All right, so one other announcement, and I was mentioning to somebody earlier, so I get up early on Sundays to kind of go through the material. Today I was up at 5 a.m., kind of wanted to run through everything again. And in the back of my mind, from 5 o'clock until 7:30 or so, I was asking myself this question, like, should I or shouldn't I? That was the question that was kind of in the back of my mind, right? And so what I was wrestling with, and you guys know, over the past few months, 6 months, I've said some things, like shared some personal stuff that's got me in trouble, right? Like from time to time. So today, I'm going to share something that's going to get me in big trouble, like the worst trouble I've been in. As a matter of fact, I'm probably risking my Christmas gifts from family for this, okay? So I want to acknowledge today is my mother-in-law's birthday, Tina Bigwell. She will not be happy that I mentioned it, but, she's a wonderful woman. I've known her for 30 years, an incredibly godly woman. I'm most thankful that she raised a godly daughter, but she's just been a tremendous example over the years. It helps that she tells me I'm her favorite son-in-law, even though she only has one. But if she has two, I would like to think I would still be favorite. So happy birthday, Tina.
You want to get in deeper trouble?
No, that's enough.
Actually,
I think she's like 35 or 36. I don't know how that works, but I think that's what it is. Yeah, we're having brunch at our house later. I'm sure I'm going to hear about that. So, all right, we will jump into class today. So, if you're visiting with us, we've been studying Job for the last few months, and I think it took us like a month and a half or 2 months to get through the first 2 chapters of Job. We are now, we got through chapter 3 last week, and one of the things that I was really wrestling with is, what do we do this week and next, because we only have 2 weeks left, right? So, and then Ken is going to take over. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of do a flyover of chapters 4, 5, and 6. And when I say a flyover, I think it is important just to get some context of, one of Job's friends' first speech, Eliphaz, and then, look a little bit at how Job responded, and then we're going to fast forward all the way to chapter 38, where God begins to respond to Job, right? And I'll tell you, as I was preparing, the material for this week, I spent just an hour and a half on chapter 38 in preparation. And it was amazing to really, look at what God said and kind of correlate it to other scriptures. So I hope that that's where we'll spend the majority of our time today. But we are going to jump into to chapter 4. So I'm going to start by reading chapter 4 a little bit out of the book, because I think Brother Haley really sets this up well, right? And so he titles this, and this kind of covers chapters 4 through 13, 3 cycles of speeches. He said, one may begin the cycle of speeches with Job's introductory speech in chapter 3, right? And if you think back to chapter 3, Job said, why was I born? Why didn't I die at birth? Why do you continue to shed light on me, right? That was kind of chapter 3, okay? So with Job's introductory speech in chapter 3, or he may consider it as an introduction and begin the cycle of Eliphaz's first speech in chapter 4. It seems to me that the cycle actually began with the speech of Eliphaz, to which Job responded. The speeches of the 3 friends in Job are not altogether a debate though there are elements of such in numerous places, nor are they essential speeches of one man's answering the speech of the preceding speaker, though this occurs at times. In some instances, the speaker directs his speech to Job and vice versa. In others, the speaker will direct his attention to a point of controversy. There are times when the speaker will be talking about God. However, at times, Job is talking to God, and at other times, he's talking to himself. This is where I thought this got interesting, right? The friends appear always to be striving to maintain their theological position, whereas Job is seeking after the truth while at the same time retaining his favor with God, right? So there's a difference between talking to talk, right, and to reinforce your beliefs or your position, and seeking, the truth, right? And I think the difference was, and I said this repeatedly last week, Job was approaching it from a position of understanding, right? He was seeking to repair, to understand why he was going through the struggles he was going through and why those things had fallen on him, but also, he wanted to seek to understand, why, right? We talked about, you may never know the answer to why, right? And I'm going to kind of continue on here. The friends see material reward as a blessing for serving God, but Job sought answers to his question and sees favor and fellowship with God as the object and blessing of his search. At a point in the speeches, Job, as observed by a previous author, Anderson, is his lack of concern. This is what I thought was really intriguing here. I'll start over. As a point in his speeches of Job observed by Anderson, in his lack of concern for his losses or his illness, which never is directly addressed, but always his concern is about God and his relationship with him, right? And so I think when you get into this deeply and really look at it, Job was yearning, to understand why, as many of us would if we lost everything that Job lost. But he was most concerned, about his relationship with God. And it kind of goes back to, we talked about pretty repeatedly last week, Job was asking God to cut him off. And we'll see that a little bit, right? He was asking God, to take his life, right? Never once did he consider that. And so the approach in which Job, really looked at and experienced the loss, it's pretty remarkable, right? It's one that I think we can look at and we can all, look to that example. So we're going to start in chapter 4. I saw you raise your hand when I was reading. Did you have a comment that you were going to make? Okay, all right. Ali was scratching his head. All right, so we're going to start in verse 1 of chapter 4. So it says, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? So essentially, if you think about Job speaking in chapter 3, his friend said, hey, I have some advice for you. Are you willing to listen, right? So it opens by, are you willing to listen or not, right? And then he goes on to say, behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. What I find interesting about that is we learn a little bit about Job in 3 and 4. It says, your words have upheld him who is stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees, right? So if we think back to kind of chapter 1 and chapter 2, we think about what God said about Job. He was blameless, he was upright. And we learn here that obviously there was more to Job in terms of the impact that he had, on those in the community and those around him. Not something I had ever thought about, but I thought it was really interesting that that's the way the speech starts in terms of, commenting him on how he's lifted up others. Now, here's where you start to get into, the controversy. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. It is not your fear of God, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways, hope. So what's he saying here, right, in verses 5 and 6? Any takes on that? So, but now it has come to you, okay? But what's first of all, he's pointing out that now Job, is inflicted with some sort of loss. Now he's facing a struggle, and he's impatient. So he's obviously taught people over the years, that they should trust in God, that they should put their concerns on God. But now all of a sudden, it's come to him, and he says, is not your fear of God and your confidence and the integrity of your ways your hope, right? So why are you questioning God here, right? That's really what he's saying, right? You're now struggling. You've now been negatively impacted, and why are you questioning God? So I just thought it was interesting to get the opening there of chapter 4. The couple of comments that Brother Haley made that I thought I'd share, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. It says, Brother Haley paraphrased Eliphaz's comments in this way. Whatever caused the sin you are suffering from, you can turn away from it and be restored to God. But if you're trusting in a form of self-righteousness, continuing to deny your sinfulness, there is no hope, right? So if you kind of go all the way through, his response in chapter 4, and we'll talk a little bit about it in chapter 5, he's basically saying, you did this to yourself, Job, right? Essentially. Like, you brought this on you, Job. God didn't do this to you, right? Now, we know that's not the case, right? But essentially, that's what he's saying indirectly and directly, in the first part of chapter 4, right? And just a couple of other pieces, as you read that, he's essentially saying Job is perishing, he's being cut off, and he's neither innocent or upright, is what's inferred here. And then he goes on to say, essentially, you must be a great sinner because look at how God is punishing you. Okay, so that's kind of chapter 4 in the first part. If you read it from start to finish. Now we're just going to jump in, and once again, we're going to go briefly through, the first part of chapter 5. And then I'm gonna add just another comment from the book here that I thought was interesting. So let me get to that page. So as we go to chapter 5 of Job, we'll start in verse 1. He says, "Call now. Is there anyone who will answer? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple." Okay. Now what Brother Haley said here is he says in this statement, Eliphaz expressed a truth worthy of real wisdom. Vexation is a provocation of the heart that leads to unholy action which destroys the person who is morally deficient. And jealousy or envy, either of which acts as a cancer of the soul, the simple one, a character who can be enticed or seduced. But this is what he says. This appears to essentially say that Job fell into this category, right? So he's essentially saying, once again, in chapters 4 and the first part of chapter 5, he's saying, you did this to yourself. And here's where it gets really contentious, right? In verse 3, he says, I have seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I curse the dwelling. Think about your friend saying this to you here in chapter 4. His children are far from safety, they are crushed in the gate, and there is no one to deliver them, right? Job lost, 7 sons, 3 daughters, and his friends essentially saying here that it's his fault, right, that he lost them. Like, with friends like these, like, who needs enemies, right? I mean, so here we have his friend making some real serious accusations, like I said, either directly or indirectly, right?
Job is probably thinking the same thing, but he's at a loss as to what he's done.
So my take on that, so the comment in here, Job is probably thinking the same thing, but he's at a loss in his son. I think Job seeks to understand why, right? What I gather, and I'd love to hear other thoughts on this, right? I don't see Job as much seeking what have I done personally, but more trying to understand why God, right? What is the reason for this, right? I'd like to hear any other side of opinion. Currie?
I would think that, we think when things happen, what have we done to cause this? At least that's how I.
Right, absolutely.
I figured, what have I done? What have I done? Why? Why is this happening? And there's just no answer. I don't think that there's really, when you're trying to follow God and everything like that, I really think that He wants us to, there is no end, that He wants us to trust Him through it.
Absolutely, yeah. And so one of the things we talked about, Currie, is we don't always get the answer we want, right?
Right.
And the answer doesn't always come in the present time, right? So like, oftentimes something happens, we want to know why now it happened, right? But God has a plan, and He's preparing us for something. And we may not understand it until 5, 10, 15 years down the road, but there's a reason that God allows things to happen, right?
Right. And we have to trust Him. That we have to trust Him.
Absolutely. Yeah, a big part of it is.
When things happen, I think it either helps you to make you turn away from Him, or it brings you closer to Him. For me, it has really brought me closer to Him.
Absolutely.
I see how badly I need Him.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So let me ask you kind of an off-topic question, and Jeff, I'll let you go in just 1 second. I'll ask the question, then I'll let Jeff speak, and then I'll. So how do we I want you to, this would apply both to worldly and to spiritual. How do we grow as human beings, right? So think about that for a second, right? Like, if you think of yourself as an adolescent, right, who, you're born, you get into your teens, you begin to, get into your late teens, early 20s. Think of, for a second, how we grow, and we'll come back to that. But I'll let you go first, Jeff.
It wasn't a real big comment. It was just an observation that we almost never take the opposite perspective, right? When something good is happening to us, we almost are never saying, God, what did I do to deserve this?
I mean, why should we, right?
Yeah, it's just an assumption that we deserve it, right?
We always deserve good things, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about growth. I think, that's kind of part of the growth is wrestling with the question of, okay, when good things happen, why are they happening?
Yeah. I think that's a level of spiritual maturity that, we should all strive to reach, right? Is to be able to recognize that every blessing comes from God, right? So I'll come back to you in the back. I'll just start up here first.
Well, Job answers the first question. He just wishes he would die.
Absolutely.
He says, Lord, why am I in this terrible world? End it now.
Yeah.
And so, that's his reaction there. It's not that I must have sinned. It's like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Right.
It's, it's different than, the child puts his hand on the stove and hurts himself, and then he learns not to touch the stove anymore. Job is now in a scenario where everything he touches is burning.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just don't want to be here anymore. Just end it now.
I think kind of phrasing that a little differently, and we saw it in chapter 3, and we'll kind of see it when we get into chapter 6, right? Is, why, God, do you continue to allow me to live? Like, why do I continue to go through this, right? So, Bill, you were going to make a comment, and then I want to get back to the, how do we grow? How do we learn? Go ahead, Bill.
So one thought I keep having in my mind relative to the book of Job is context, right? Job, I believe, was written and Job lived during the time before the law was given. So Job lived when the heads of the household were able to speak with God directly. And so we know that sin has consequence, right? If you sin against touching the stove, we know that there are many sins that have immediate consequence, and there's a lot of sin that don't have immediate consequence. But during this time period, there wasn't the law of Moses, and so God would bless people differently, right? I mean, he didn't bless people based on following the law because there was no law. But God definitely blessed Job based maybe on his relationship with God, right? And so this idea of being blessed by God and then potentially other people seeing you being cursed by God because of an unseen or unknown sin may very well have been a potential truth, right? I mean, people that have made God mad did not suffer well, right? They didn't come out in the end very good. So you kind of wonder, during the time of Job, how was sin rewarded, right? It was potentially rewarded differently. So his friends may have a point, right? Job, what did you do? You know, I mean, they may have not wanted to come near him because of the mass calamity that took place immediately. And they're trying to figure out, what in the world could you have possibly done to deserve this? And to our reading, he did nothing, right? But there may have been other instances, you know, where God did not bless them, which could be perceived as being cursed by God because of how bad their fall may have been in that, you know, in that time and age when sin and faith was rewarded differently by God. It's an interesting thought to me because we have this time before the law, and then we have the time of the law in which we know the Jews were absolutely blessed by God for following his will. Without question, you know, David was blessed, Solomon was blessed. They were blessed beyond what the world could see. It's an interesting thought.
No, I mean, I think, Bill, there's some merit to that, right? And I think if you just look at the, you know, Satan's argument, you know, his whole premise with God was that people only follow you. People are only faithful to you because you've blessed them, you know, with material blessings, right? So obviously, you know, that was Satan's argument. So it would lend credit to the fact that, you know, there was some correlation, right, between blessings and spiritual and also potentially sin and, you know, calamity, right? So, but going back to kind of this whole discussion around why and you know, we were talking about this. So how do we learn in life, right? Like, just think of anything. How do you learn? Like, you start a new job, day one, and how do we learn? Pardon? Repetition. Okay. So that's one element of the word I want to hear.
Trial and error.
Trial and error is one, right? What else?
Experiences.
We learn from our mistakes.
People teach you.
So all of those things fall in the umbrella of a big word that starts with E.
Experiences.
Experience, right? Like, so we learn through experience. So how can we grow, you know, spiritually, right? Without experiences, right? Without falling down, getting up, you know, without looking back at why we fell down and, you know, how we got up, right? So the experiences that we have, right, and the experiences that those around us have, you know, those are all things leading to spiritual growth. You know, could we ever, and I'm just throwing this out for a discussion, right? I mean, could we ever go from you're baptized today to you're a fully faithful, you know, everything, you know, that you could be Christian, that God would want you to be here on earth? Could you go from baptism to that? Like, no, right? I mean, you have to, that faith has to be perfected over time through trials, right? Through tribulations and to your point, Currie, trusting in God, right? And knowing that there's certain things only God is going to get you through, right? At the end of the day, like, all the people around you, you know, can say all the right things, they can do all the right things, but at the end of the day, God is going to be the one that gets you to the other side of that, right? So that's why I think that, you know, and I'll come to you in just 1 second, Frank, and then back to you, Allie. That's why I think, you know, when we look at Job's, you know, experiences, right? Like, the reality of it is, if you think of spirituality, and spiritual maturity is probably a better way to put it, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe Job was at an 8, but he was stuck at an 8, right? Like, maybe he was not going to get above an 8 unless this happened to him, right? Now, it just so happened that Satan, you know, wanted to challenge God, and God said, hey, I think Job can handle it. But maybe this was taking Job from an 8 to a 9.5, or an 8 to a 9, and he had been perfected and refined in every other way he could, you know, without this, you know, major tribulation in his life, right? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just saying, like, you know, if he had kind of reached a peak, and he needed to push through it, this may have been what God chose to push him through it, right? I mean, we see at the end of chapter 42 that all was right, you know, when it was all said and done. Frank?
I think, like, trials in life, as James said, that's counted all as joy. You know that trials are going to be there, so it's about perspective. And following those trials help us grow. Kind of like lifting weights makes your muscles stronger, right? During
Yes.
stress. But at the same time, I think there is an element of discipline from our Father. Hebrews talks about discipline. Not that He makes bad things happen, but that He may not bless you in certain circumstances because you're not ready for that blessing.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the right mindset. You need discipline from your Father. So I think there's an element of that too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If you didn't hear Frank, he said there's an element of potential discipline, or, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Frank, but there's potentially an element of discipline, and there may be, the delay of blessings because you just aren't ready for those blessings, at a certain time, right? And once again, if you look at the different phases of life that we go through, both, as Christians, and the other aspects of life, there's just certain times where we may not be ready for things, and we just need more time, right? We just need more experience, right? Like, God may have a wonderful blessing, in store for us years down the road, but that blessing may not come until He figures that you're ready to handle it, right? I'll come to you, Sherry, first.
I just want to make a comment. I've learned and grown so much over the years just by serving other people.
Yeah.
It's helped me to grow as well.
No, so the comment was, she's learned and grown so much over the years by serving other people. I want to come back to that in just 1 second. I'm going to let Sherry comment, and then I'll come back.
Say about Jesus and the rich man. How the rich man, and he had kept all the stuff, but Jesus knew that he wasn't.
That was the one thing that was standing in his way. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, God understands. God understands the level that we're at, right? And what is preventing us from getting to the next level, right? And if we're diligently seeking, He's going to put us in that position to kind of break through. And I'll tell you, very transparently, this class and being responsible for this class is something that kind of helped me break through the next level, right? I wouldn't be where I am spiritually today if I didn't have to stand before you every week and, prepare for this class for hours. So, I volunteered for the class originally because they needed someone, to teach the class, right? So I'm like, hey, I'll teach the class, no problem, right? But little did I know that, the way God would work in my life over the last 6 months, with this class, right? And I think my trial probably through the whole thing was, feeling prepared, feeling adequate to answer questions, and also, just forcing myself to dedicate the time to make sure, that I was fully prepared, right? So not that it was negative in terms of as a trial, but obviously, God was working in my life, to improve my spirituality. There was one more, and so to kind of go back to it, you're by serving people, right? If there was one thing I could say over and over again, and Tad and I had this conversation this week, to people who are both capable and have, and know, right? So what the right thing to do is, and you're capable. The best thing I can tell you to do is serve people in some way, in the church, right? There's no thing that's going to make you grow more than to serve people in the church, right? And it can be serving in the form of a class, it can be serving at the table, because when you open the door, then the door is going to open a little bit wider, and it's going to open a little bit wider, and it's going to open a little bit wider, and before you know, you're going to go from kind of standing here at the table, passing the plate, to potentially, saying a prayer at the table, to potentially reading scripture. But if you never open the door, you're never going to go through it, right? So to your point, the experience we gain, right, by putting ourselves out there, by making the commitment, is really what, probably the best thing we can do for spiritual growth. Any other comments before we breeze through chapter 6? I see a comment back here. Ken?
Quick point, and that is, I think you asked about spiritual growth. I think a segment of spiritual growth is actually acknowledging God when you have blessings, or about the blessings that you have, being grateful. I mean, rain comes on, is on the just and the unjust. Okay, but the spiritual people, spiritually mature, are ones that acknowledge God in the blessings that they have. And then with that, as you had just talked about, and that is, once you acknowledge that you have blessings, what do you expect to do with it? And that is where, you know, to much, who has been given much, much is required. So what can I do with the blessings that I have that I can enrich somebody else for the glory of God?
Yeah, I mean, I love the connection between, okay, I've been blessed, and I acknowledge it, right? That's kind of one part. But the second part is what, you know, what can I do, right, with that blessing? That's great. I remember, you know, early on in my career, you know, I was a sales commission guy. You know, when I would get that commission check, Shannon and I were, you know, at Harding, when I get that commission check, I'd be like, God, thank you, you know, so much for this commission check. You know, it came from you. And I was really good at that kind of early on because of, you know, the struggles and, you know, being a new husband and responsible for things. And I can honestly say I'm not nearly as good at that today as I was then. And so it's something, once again, you talk about spiritual growth through this class, it's something that I'm reminded of, you know, here today, to be more diligent to acknowledge the blessings that come from God. Just because, you know, you may not have the same need, you know, per se then that you do now, that doesn't change the fact that God's blessing you when he gives you, you know, something that, you know, he blessed you with. You know, you may have worked for it, but at the end of the day, he blessed you with it. Keith.
Thank God for all these good things that we have. But it's quite often we can make decisions, and I've heard this, we'll make a decision that's a bad choice, bad things will happen to us. And we try to, that's experience, and we live and we try to mature from those things and learn. But then, what do? Satan steps in. We don't know this. Job didn't know it. The book of Job is a perfect example of everything's going great and you're blindsided by a truck. What do? When we believe and we're trying to do the best we can, and something from out of the blue, we have no contact with it, no knowledge of it, and it takes something out, and it doesn't. That is the example that is the experience for us, just like what Job is happening right now.
Yeah.
How are we going to come out of it? And where are we going to put our faith when that happens? Because that's when a lot of people go down and they don't come back from it. It's that blinded curve that we didn't bring on ourselves. I know Job didn't bring this upon himself because we've read the book.
You have the answers to the test, right, Keith?
Yeah, and this happens to a lot of us when things happen to us, and sometimes we want to say, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? But it was Satan. Satan is out there to try to knock us off the track and make us fall. And then it can happen. To be strong, I think those things will happen. If we hang in there and we put our faith, it will make Satan run from us. But that don't mean he's going to stay gone. He can come back if he will.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I'll come over here. It's funny that you say that, Keith. So if you think about what has transpired in chapter 1 and 2, and we observe, you know, Job's loss of his possessions and then his loss of his health, right? And then you immediately jump into this, you know, beginning of his first comments about his birth and then his friends and back and forth. What would have happened if right at the end of chapter 2, God came down to Job and said, hey, Job, you know, I did all this because, you know, I wanted to prove to Satan that, you know, you would remain faithful to me. And, you know, it was me who allowed him to do this. And I did it because, like, I wanted you to be example to billions of people, you know, after you. Like, what would have happened, you know, both for Job there, and then what would have happened, you know, if we didn't get, you know, the next 30 chapters or so, 36 chapters or so?
I think it'd be a big change because God's wisdom knows what's best. And that's one of those things, God knows what's best. It happened the way it did so it could play out. Job needed to be able, we need to be able to say and complain a lot if we need to God. Now, the time frame, I want to say this couldn't have, so they sat there for 7 days. Okay, for the next few days, how long would it take them to talk back and forth? I don't know. This happened within weeks, I'm thinking. So we can have some bad days and some hard times. I'm assuming Job sat there in ashes, oozing all over the place for quite a while. And it can be pretty hard. And this came from behind. Job had no idea. And how many things happened to us with us not even knowing it? And are we going to take it good? How are we going to? The book is to teach us. People, be awake, be aware. Satan can knock you off your feet, and you can lay down for a long time. You still got to hold on to the anchor. It's God. At the end of the day, when God spoke to Job, and he told him, who is this that knocks on my door? You know, who are you to talk to me? That's all Job needed.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, that's all we need, to hear God, and we can hear him right here. I think that's a perfect example.
Yeah, so I think everything you said, it makes complete sense. Where I was going with that, Keith, is if God had stopped at the end of chapter 2 and told Job, you know, the reason, like Job never would have had an opportunity to influence, you know, his friends the way he did, you know, and he never would have had an opportunity to work through it mentally and spiritually the way he did. So the trial occurred, right? And then, you know, after the trial, there was this period of utilizing the trial to maybe, right, to maybe change the perspective of his friends, right, about the way God operates. And also through the process, Job obviously worked through some elements of why and, you know, how God operates. And my favorite part of the whole book, honestly, is when you start to get to chapter 38 and 39. And by the way, we're stuck in chapter 4, 5, and 6 today. We literally could do this until, like, I had gray hair. We could do it so long. And probably still not get through the whole book. I'll come over here for the comment.
Real quick, we were talking about growth and spiritual maturity, and then Keith said something, and then it got me thinking. With me, you know, you become a Christian, and at first, I'm just talking about me. I don't know if it resonates with anyone else, but you're kind of just going along with stuff, and bad stuff happens, and you pray, and you're like, kind of go with the flow, you know? And at this point, with me, I realized it's about choices and how you react to things. And, you know, you can choose. You can choose to grow, or you can choose not to. You can choose to be angry when bad things happen and afraid, or you can choose to say no. I'm not going to be angry about this. I'm not going to dwell in fear. I'm going to choose to step away from those things and step into Christ and step into joy, regardless of this terrible thing that's happening to me. Those are choices, I've realized. I can choose joy, even when something terrible is happening. You know? And realizing that has been very freeing for me. Because some terrible things happen. And realizing you don't have to dwell in those terrible things, and you can say just no, I'm not going to live in that. It's horrible, but I don't have to accept that as what I'm living in.
Amen.
I just choose to say no, because I have Christ and I'm going to be joyful regardless. And that is just, I think, the biggest spiritual step that I've made in a long time. And I think that's a big difference between being spiritually mature and being not.
Oh, you said it. I was waiting for you to actually say that, and you just made the connection right there. Your choices are basically both a form and a measuring stick of your spiritual maturity.
And I think Job knew that.
So.
I think Job was choosing God this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly was, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if you really delve into, and we could spend, 2 or 3 weeks on this, kind of the psychology of how, Job looked at the situation, and if you took everything out and you just kind of focused on kind of his thought process in terms of what he asked and what he wanted, and you really just looked at it from a psychology perspective, you would probably recognize, like, at the end of the day, a really spiritually mature person who was being tested And never once did he, people may feel differently, like there was some cracks, but there was obviously never, a break, right? And yeah, at the end of the day, like, it was always about his relationship with God and, relying on God, right? And he always wanted God to make the choice, not him, right? Like, it was in God's hands, essentially, right?
This book made me real angry lots of times when I first read it. And I think I'm coming to terms with it when I see that ultimately it's between Job and God, and he chose God.
Yeah, he did, 100%. Any other comments? We have like a minute or two. I'm not going to start in chapter 38, which is where I was going to go next. We have 2 minutes left. But next week we are going to go to chapter, we're going to just start, I think, in chapter 42 is what we're going to do next week. Go ahead, Peggy.
2 key words that I take away. One is persecution. Tad talked about it this morning. If you're solid, if you're that Christian, people are going to persecute you. It might be somebody in school if you're a teacher. But the other key word is forgiveness. What are we going through? What's happening? Why am I being persecuted? Because of my spiritual faith and the choices I make for myself, my children, my grandchildren. Teaching that, how you get there, teaching that thankful and grateful every day means, yep, you're going to be persecuted. Yep, we live in a world. Yep, we're not all at the same level. But God is the choice.
Amen.
I think that's very well said, Peggy. Very, very, very well said. Well, was there one more comment?